hold on. Wait a minute. Okay. For our readers and listeners at the Libertarian Republic who may not know you, tell us a little bit about Abby Johnson. Who is Abby Johnson? Tell us a little bit about your story and kind of your background.
Sure. So I worked at Planned Parenthood for 8 years of my life. I got involved in college. Didn't know much about the organization, but was told that, Planned Parenthood was there to help women, to serve women. And after a considerable amount of time, just started rising through the ranks and eventually became a clinic director for the affiliate out of Houston, Texas. Was there for 8 years, and eventually in 2009 ended up leaving the organization after a series of events had taken place, and ultimately, though, left after witnessing a live ultrasound guided abortion procedure where I saw a 13-week-old baby fight and struggle for his life in the womb during an abortion. And I knew then that there was humanity in the womb. I knew that life was present in the womb. I knew that what I had believed in, what I had been a champion for, was a lie, that it had been a lie, that I had eagerly believed a lie,
Mm-hmm.
and that I was on the wrong side of this debate. And so I ended up leaving and joined a pro-life organization that was in my community. And when I did that, Planned Parenthood took me to court and tried to silence me, tried to get a permanent gag order against me so that I wouldn't be able to share my story. And when they did that, the media became very interested in my story, wanting to know why Planned Parenthood was trying to silence me. What didn't they want the public to know? And that just created a lot of interest in my story. And that really catapulted me out into the media. And so ever since then, for over 10 years now, I've been sharing my story publicly and working in the pro-life movement, and really, trying to, yes, expose what takes place, inside of the abortion industry, but also really trying to bring about some healing. I mean, we're looking at over 60 million abortions that have taken place in the United States since the legalization of abortion in this country. And that is, 60 million men and women who are suffering, many silently, from the damaging effects of abortion. And so I'm really trying to help bring some healing to those who have been very greatly affected by abortion in our society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, would you say, you said when you saw that abortion, when you saw the life, would you say that you kind of knew beforehand and that was just like the full realization, or were you just oblivious to it beforehand? Did you think that you were on the righteous side beforehand and that was kind of like a smack in the face, or?
I mean, there had been, things here and there that had really started to open up my eyes to what was going on. I was on Twitter the other day and somebody had asked, like, what was your red pill moment,
Yeah.
And I would say that ultrasound was sort of, that ultrasound guided abortion was sort of my red pill moment. But
Mm.
um there had been a lot of other things that had happened that were sort of like mini red pill moments, I
Yeah.
guess, for me,
Uh,
where I had really just thought, what are we doing here? Like I think I had grown this callus over my heart for that 8 year time period. And I tell people, when you're sort of living this life of sin, which, I mean, really that's what it is.
mm.
You there's these constant crossroads in your life. And this is for any of us, right? I mean, I think this happens for us on a daily basis,
Right.
where there's this crossroad in your daily life, in your weekly life, wherever it is.
Right.
And you make a decision and you look at this path, this crossroad, and you make a decision and you say, am I going to make the righteous decision or am I going to make the sinful decision?
Mm.
And if you make the righteous decision, then your heart draws closer to the Lord, right?
Right.
If you make the sinful decision, then there's, I believe, some numbness
Mm.
that seeps into your conscience. There's a callus, then a small callus forms over your heart, right?
Right.
When you continue to make that choice every day for 8 years, that callus grows and grows and grows so thick that it really takes huge eye-opening experiences for there to be a break in that callus. So there were some things that happened to me in that last year, like being told that we were going to be doubling our abortion quotas. That was really eye-opening to me. Like, what are you talking about, abortion quotas? Why are we doubling those? Aren't we
Right.
supposed to be keeping abortion safe, legal, and rare? That was the talking
Right.
point I had been told for 8 years. So what are we doing here? So there was something, like that. That was shocking to me. I remember going to the last NAF conference, the National Abortion Federation conference. I remember looking at a research project that was done by an abortionist, and he was talking about um, doing a research project. He was already doing it on women who were 24 weeks pregnant, and he was giving them these just overdoses of misoprostol. So the medication abortion, what we're giving women now up until the 12th week of pregnancy in the United States. He was doing this in Canada up until the 24th week of pregnancy. So he was doing this to women. They were delivering live babies in a hotel room, and he was giving them biohazard bags. And he was giving them biohazard bags so they could put their live babies into this biohazard bag so that their babies would suffocate to death. I remember having that moment when I was looking at this board where he was describing his research and thinking, what is going on here? There were those sorts of moments in those months leading up to that ultrasound guided abortion where I feel like the Lord was really lifting the veil
Mm.
off of my eyes so that when I saw that abortion take place, I was ready to really see,
Mm-hmm.
so that I was ready to really say, what are we doing? This is wrong. This is the final straw. So that I was, you have to have ears to hear and eyes to see.
Yeah.
And I feel like if those things hadn't have really built up, I wouldn't have had eyes to see.
Right.
I would have just taken that path. I would have been at a crossroads and I would have just taken that sinful path.
Mm.
But because I'd had all of these moments before, I was really ready to open my eyes. I was ready for that veil to finally be lifted so that I could say, okay, enough. I cannot do this one more minute.
Mm. It's kind of like a guided process and serious.
Yes.
Lord wants.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about the Ahmaud Arbery case. I know that's kind of what brought us together. I saw some of your stuff on Twitter, and you were kind of vocal about that, and I think you and I are at a place of agreement on that. But talk a little bit about that, and then kind of the article that I wrote that you seem to be a pretty big fan of, and I appreciate that. I appreciate the retweet and the kind vote of confidence there. Talk about the Liberty Hangout stuff and the whole ordeal there. If there's anything else you'd like to say, kind of give our listeners uh, a little bit more detail on that drama if they haven't read my piece.
Yeah, I had, I had made a, I want to say I'm not, I don't think any of us have any of us, regular Joes out here have any of the uh, final. None of us have the final details on the Arbery case. We don't know exactly what happened. I think a lot of people are very quick to make, when things like this happen, particularly when it has to do with, racial tension or anything, there's people that come down on one side, like this, I'm the judge and jury on this, and here's
Yeah.
the final word. And this is, and I think that we all always have to be careful
Mm-hmm.
in those situations, because the reality is that we don't know um, what exactly takes place all the time. But what I do know is that it's always tragic when human life is lost,
Absolutely.
period.
Absolutely.
No matter what the circumstance, no matter who is guilty or not guilty, or what the circumstance is, I know that when human life is lost, it is always tragic.
Absolutely.
And um, and I know that as a person who is a gun owner,
Mm-hmm.
who is a staunch defender of the Second Amendment, I also know that I am responsible for um, every time my finger wraps around the trigger of my gun,
Right.
and I am responsible for every bullet that
Right.
fires from my gun.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I do believe, based on what I have seen, the information that has been released, that there has been that there was some irresponsible um, gun practices that have taken place um, in this case. And I think that um, because of that, I think that life, no matter his guilt or innocence, depending on what happened before or after, I do think that life was lost
Mm-hmm.
because of irresponsible um, action that was taken by a gun owner.
Mm-hmm.
And I think um, that sometimes, I think that that's why it's really important for those of us who are gun owners to take that ownership very seriously, and not take it for granted.
Right.
Um, that we do have a responsibility there. And people can give, there are times that some people can give gun owners a bad name and a bad rap. And so I think it's okay for when that happens, for gun owners to say, that wasn't a good decision made by that gun owner. And it's okay for us to call out bad behavior, just like as a someone who is considered a leader in the pro-life movement. If I see someone who is acting irresponsible in the pro-life movement, I can absolutely say that is an irresponsible decision that was made by this pro-life person in the pro-life movement. And that is what I have seen frequently by the person who owns the account at Liberty Hangout, the Twitter account. His name is Justin. He owns that Liberty Hangout account. I see irresponsible behavior over and over again by Justin at the Liberty Hangout account, and particularly when it comes to his responses to people in the pro-life movement. And it's okay for us in the pro-life movement um, to say that is irresponsible behavior.
Right.
And it's okay for those of us to say what he's saying right now does not represent the pro-life movement.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not who we are in the pro-life movement. This guy has said before that people who are post-abortive have no place to speak in the pro-life movement, that they have no place to lead others in the pro-life movement. And that is absurd. That is absolutely ridiculous. Um, the pro-life movement is primarily made up of converts. The pro-life movement is primarily made up of women who have had abortions, people who were once staunchly pro-choice, people who used to volunteer at abortion clinics, people who used to identify as, pro-choice feminists, men who have taken their girlfriends or wives to have abortions, people who used to be on the other side of this proverbial fence and are now pro-life, people who have learned from their mistakes, who are now not part of that movement, who have sought forgiveness and who are now pro-life. That is the overwhelming majority of the pro-life movement, because guess what? We are all sinners. And the majority of the pro-life movement, over 90% of the pro-life movement, are people who identify as Christian. And we have all made mistakes. And I always tell people, don't be mad at someone just because they sin differently than you do.
Right.
And so, we are all in need of God's forgiveness. And most of us recognize that. And so it's absurd to say that so and so is not allowed to speak on this issue because of their past indiscretion or their past sin, because really that would disqualify all of us from speaking about anything.
Right.
Because we all have past sin in our lives.
Well, and it's funny that you say that, because when I read those comments, I'm just sitting there and I'm like, read the scriptures, man.
Yeah.
Every single one of those people were at one point sinners, but then they were redeemed by God. And it's a point to show not how bad people are, but how good God is.
Right.
That he would redeem even the worst people that we would think were the worst in society. And so if you don't have a right to speak on the behalf of mothers in the pro-life movement just because you have an abortion and nobody has anything or had an abortion, then nobody has a right to speak on anything.
Well, you better throw out many of the books in the Bible, because they were written by Paul, who was a murderer and persecutor of Christians. So, several books in the Bible, you better just throw them out.
Yeah.
And look at King David in the Bible. I mean, God uses all who, the Bible talks about this, that God can use all things for his glory.
Yeah.
And he can use all of us who are repentant. He can use all of our past sins. So it's really it's really the sin of pride.
Yeah.
To believe that that someone's past doesn't somehow disqualifies them from receiving the grace and the goodness of the Lord.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny that you say that, because one time I was in the process of reading a book. I'm trying to remember. He Loves Me by Wayne Jacobson. I don't know if you're familiar with any
I
of them.
haven't read it. Mm-mm.
But he was talking about a different perspective on the prodigal son. And he was talking about just that point. The point of the prodigal son is not to show, how horrible the son was, but just how good that the father is.
Mm-hmm.
And here the prodigal son went through all that things, and he was just so horrible. And he got to the point, he's like, just take me back and I'll work as your bondservant. And I'll eat the slop that you feed the pigs. But what did the father do? He said, my son is home, and open arms, kill the fatted calf, and let's have a feast. So it's just a point of showing how good the father is, instead of putting the attention on the sins of the son. Mm-hmm. So it baffles me that somebody would try to discredit someone who, like yourself, has such a powerful story that I think the world needs to hear, just because of your past sins. The last time I checked, God was a good God, and he forgives all the children as long as they ask, And
well, and again, it's just like you said, it's not about me. right? Like it's about the goodness of God.
Right.
And so I imagine, and that's such a perfect example, Caleb, because, it's like, I can imagine, like, in the story of the prodigal son, like, I can imagine being one of the other kids and being like, what the heck? Like, what? Like, I've been serving you. I've been doing all the good things. And like this bozo comes back and
Yeah.
like, what? Like, I can imagine like being that person. Okay. Like, I can imagine being the person that like throws the flipping tantrum. Okay. Like, I can imagine being that person. But then, just constantly being reminded, like, look, this is about the goodness of our Father.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you know, and so in a way, it's almost like, I think the temptation for us, because we are made of flesh, right? And I think this is what we see in this guy too, is like he's throwing a tantrum.
Mm-hmm.
That like, hey, this lady helped to facilitate 22,000 abortions.
Right.
Why are you celebrating what she's done? Why are you celebrating her? But it's not about celebrating me.
Right.
It's about celebrating the goodness of God.
You're
And
right.
that's what it always comes back to.
Right.
It's, and that's what people are like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're willing to, put your whole life story out there, for the world to see in a film. And I always remind people, guys, I did Unplanned. Like I allowed my book to be turned into a movie. Not because I wanted Abby Johnson to become a household name.
Right.
They could have used another name. They could have used like Alice Jones. Okay. Like it wasn't about like my name getting out there.
Yeah.
I didn't do it so that Abby Johnson would become a household name. I did it so that every single household in America would be shown that God's love is true, that it's pure, and that it's available to everyone.
Mm.
And that the power of redemption and his mercy is available to every single household. That's why I did it. It wasn't about me. And so I can see, like, in the tantrum throwing that I see on Twitter and social media, like not just in this guy, but like in everyone.
Right.
Sometimes I think we allow ourselves to forget, just like in our flesh, like we're like, well, why is this person getting all the praise? Like, why is it not me? But it's like, it's not about us. Like a true leader should always be pointing back to the goodness of our Savior.
Right.
That's what it should always be about.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I also think that it's a exercise in love and compassion and forgiveness for us. And I think if our Savior could forgive the people that are killing him while he's hanging up on the cross, I think we can exercise a little more compassion ourselves. And so, I mean, even with what I wrote, there was no malice in my heart when I wrote it. It was just to point out, hey, she's done things, but so did Paul, and so did everybody else in the Bible. The only person I know that didn't do anything like that was Jesus, which is God incarnate. So, but other than that, we've all done things that we're not so proud of and that are not so good. But like what we said, it's to show goodness of the Father.
Right.
And I just pray that His love is communicated through that.
Yeah.
Okay. The coronavirus. It's kind of throwing our world in a bit of a tizzy right now.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. And I could talk all day about that, but I think we'd kind of get off topic. But how do you feel about the fact that so many Christians are not able to worship in their houses of worship, if you want to call it that, but they're not able to go and attend their church services, but yet Planned Parenthood is still allowed to perform abortions?
Yeah, it's one of those times where we hear about in the Bible where good will be called evil and evil will be called good, right? It's been really sad to me Um, and I'm not, when I say this, I'm not saying that, precautions shouldn't have been taken or anything like that. I'm not
Right.
saying that. But
Right.
what I am saying is that it was truly shocking to me, honestly, to watch conservatives, to watch Christians, to watch churches, to watch church leaders roll over and allow the government to take away their First Amendment rights
Mm.
to worship and to take away their right to assemble.
Right.
Um, it was terrifying to
Mm-hmm.
me. And it showed just how much control the government is allowed to exert over the people without any sort of protest.
Right.
I mean, people just did it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and then, there was that pastor in Florida who did open up his church and he was arrested,
Right.
and then there were North Carolina abortion clinics were open.
Mm.
Jason Benham goes out to the clinic
Yeah.
to sidewalk counsel and he gets arrested,
That's right. My home state.
and I'm thinking, what is going on? I mean, we continued to go out to the clinics, to sidewalk counsel.
Right.
Um, we were not arrested, but while the abortion clinics were open, we were like, if they're essential, we're essential,
Right.
right? I mean, like, we're not going to be intimidated. We're not going to sit at home. Like, no way, no how. But I'm amazed at just this fear
Mm.
that is living within people, living within the hearts of Christians,
Mm.
um, and that it's become so debilitating that it's keeping people away from church. Our church opened up not this past week, but the week before, and we go to a pretty large church, and there's usually about, I would say we have 3 services.
Mm.
Each service holds about, um, I would say between 600 and 700 people
Right.
per service. And there were 66 people there.
Wow.
And I thought when I went, I had actually prepared, our family went, and I had prepared my kids that we might be sitting outside because the
Right.
capacity in the state of Texas was 250.
Okay.
So we knew we couldn't have more than 250. And I thought, we usually are running about 600 to 700 per service. So I thought, well, we may have to be sitting outside. We were only 10 minutes early, and which is way early for our family of 10.
Yeah.
But I thought, we're only 10 minutes early, so we may not get a seat.
Yeah.
And I pulled into the parking lot and there were maybe 12 cars there.
Mm.
And I thought, wait a minute, like, did I get this wrong? Are we not open? I couldn't believe it. But then I saw people walking in.
Yeah.
And we got out of the car and we walked up and we went into the church. And I mean, there were at that time maybe 20 people in there.
Mm.
And I just, I sat down in the pew and I just started crying. I think I cried through like the whole service because I just thought, what is going on here? I mean, we should be busting at the seams,
Right.
waiting to come back in to our places of worship,
Mm.
to be together with one another, to be in fellowship with one another.
Right.
What is happening? Like,
Right.
and people are like, well, we can just do it at home, the Lord is wherever you are. Okay, like I get that.
Yeah.
But like I grew up Southern Baptist and I grew up believing that 3 things are important.
Okay.
1, you read the word every day.
Right.
2, you communicate with the Lord every single day through prayer.
Right.
And 3, it is imperative that in
Mm.
order for your relationship with God to to continue to grow, you
Mhm.
must fellowship with other believers
Right.
in person through your church.
Right.
You can't do that online
Right.
through an online church service.
Right.
You need to be in communion with fellow believers.
Right.
And I'm just like, I couldn't wait to get back into
Right.
church.
Right.
And I'm like, online church is not a substitute for being in communion with fellow believers. It's just not.
No.
And I just could not believe that our church had 66 people in it when we are usually busting at the seams with 6 or 700. But it's just this fear that is so pervasive. And you know what? And I can tell you, over half the people that were there were in that category of people who are at risk. You know, those
I,
people that are over 65. And I thought, you know what? Because it's those people who would be willing to die for their faith.
yeah. Yeah, I thought that as you were speaking. I said, I wonder what the ages of the
Yeah.
people that were. Yeah, and you know what bothers me is when you read the scriptures, it talks about that the Lord gave us a spirit of a sound mind, not a spirit of fear.
That's right.
That we have not a spirit of fear, but a sound mind. And in my opinion, it should be times like this that the church shines. It should be
Yes.
times like this. I mean, you read church history, and who was it that shined in the times of crisis? Who was it that went out and healed people during plagues and pandemics and all these natural disasters? Christians, by and large, for the biggest part of human history, because secularism hasn't always been the biggest philosophy. That's fairly young as a philosophy, but
Right.
the span of human history, it has by and large always been Christians. And why is that? I wonder. It's because those people knew it. They walked with God. That they their faith was real to them. You
Hmm.
know, it wasn't just something. Let me go to church on Sunday or whenever your day is and get my little fast food Christianity and
Right.
then I'm good for the whole week. Well, you know what? If you always eat fast food, then you're malnourished. There's got to
That's
be
right.
something real there. And
Yep.
so that's something that I definitely agree with you. It bothers me, and the fact that our rights. Our rights are innate. They come from our humanity. As Jefferson said, they come from our Creator.
Hmm.
Government is only supposed to protect those rights. And
Hmm.
we're just allowing government to trample on the rights that are God given, that are inalienable. It really rocks me to my core that it's like, this is America, but it's very un American. What's going
Well,
on?
and let me tell you what bothered me even more. This is what made it even more like crazy to me. Okay, so remember a couple months ago or a few months ago, it was in Virginia, and there was like this threat to remove their Second Amendment right in
Yeah,
Virginia, and there
yeah,
was the big rally. Okay,
yeah.
there were like tens of thousands of people that were in Virginia, and they were like, oh, it's going to get really violent. Okay, nothing happened, right? And
Uh-huh.
everything was fine. But there were like literally tens of thousands of people that showed up in Virginia for this rally, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That was over gun rights.
Mm-hmm.
Here we are. I mean, same type of situation here. Government is literally stripping us of our constitutional rights. Nothing.
Yeah.
So people are more up in arms, and I'll just say Christians
Yeah.
and conservatives were more up in arms about potentially losing their right to bear arms than they were losing their rights to assemble for worship.
Mm-hmm.
We have a problem in our country.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a problem as Christians and conservatives. Our priorities are askew
Mhm.
in our country. And that, to me, as a Christian, is incredibly bothersome.
Yeah, and it's not to say that the Second Amendment,
No,
right to bear arms, isn't important. It's foundational. You know, to
absolutely.
me, it's to ensure that we have the first. You know, that's the teeth behind all the others. Um,
Absolutely.
but why are you not as upset about all the things that the First Amendment protects, the five that the First Amendment protects, as you would be the second? You
Right.
know, so I mean, I agree with you 100% on that. It's it baffles me.
Yeah.
And the fact that this is supposed to be a Christian nation, you know, we were founded as a Christian nation. Um, and, you know, if you look at research, you know, there are plenty of polls that say that we're still, as far as population, by and large, Christian. Um,
Hmm.
and the fact that people are just laying down and taking this, it,
Hmm.
it, it really, it doesn't sit right with my spirit.
No. And
Really.
then when that pastor in Florida got arrested, like Christians should have been going to the plate defending him, but they
Yeah.
weren't.
Yeah.
They were like, well, he should have followed the rules. He
Yeah.
should. And I'm like, what?
Well,
Like,
by that
no.
by that logic, should you just have followed the rules?
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm amazed. I have been amazed at the cowardice in
Yeah.
the Christian community right
Yeah.
now during this pandemic.
Okay. When it comes to Planned Parenthood ultimately being shut down,
Yeah.
do you think that will happen as the result of a cultural shift, or do you think it'll be the law and the government that finally does it, or do you think it's largely from a culture war that we ultimately win?
I think, honestly, I think if it ever happens, it's going to have to be because we take away their money.
Mm.
Um, I think they're going to have to be defunded. I mean, that's ultimately how you close them down. I mean, that's how we did it in Texas.
Right.
You know, we closed more than half of their clinics here in the state of Texas, and that was because we took away their money.
Right.
Um, you know, once and then what happens is then you start seeing a cultural shift. So what happened here in Texas was we took away their money, more than half of their clinics closed. We
Yeah.
redirected the money to other clinics that are more comprehensive, that can provide better and more comprehensive services. So they beefed up their facilities.
Okay.
And then people in the area were like, oh, so I don't really need to go to Planned Parenthood because I can go to this other place.
Mm.
Then you started seeing a cultural
Right.
shift where people were like, oh, I don't even need Planned Parenthood. So then
Right.
you saw other centers close down.
Mm.
Um, but you know, the bottom line is that, like, yes, we're changing hearts and minds on the issue of abortion,
Mm.
but until there is like some like hard hitting legislation that makes abortion illegal, we're not going to see a major culture shift. I mean, one influences the other. And
Right.
I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean, we had women that came in who were like, you know, I've always been against abortion, but if it's legal, I mean, it must be okay.
Right.
So you you can't make abortion unthinkable unless you make it illegal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of vice versa too.
Right.
You know, you can't make it illegal unless you make it unthinkable. So those two worlds are pretty symbiotic. Like you have to sort of make them work together. But we won't even see like really a cultural transformation until we start. I mean, until we can see Roe overturned
Mm-hmm.
and until we bring this back to a states' rights decision.
Right.
And I think that we would see, you know, probably at least 15 states make abortion illegal.
Mm.
Um, until we do that, I don't really think that we're going to see the major cultural shift that we want.
Right.
I
So,
mean, honestly,
so you
I think that's what it's going to take.
making it illegal will bring about the cultural shift. You think?
I think absolutely, yeah. I mean, and then you're going to have some states that like really double down,
Oh yeah.
right? I
We
mean,
New York and Virginia have already done.
hmm
That,
yeah,
that,
and so you're going to see more of that, right? Like you're going to see, California,
oh
Oregon, state of Washington, around the coast,
yeah.
like the Northeast, the West Coast, like you're going to see those states like really double down.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the Midwest, aside from like Illinois, um, the South,
Mm-hmm.
um, aside from like Arizona, New Mexico, you're going to sort of see like a pattern of like these states, these blue states that are going to become like mega blue, right? And then,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then I think that the Midwest by and large would make abortion illegal. Um, you've got, of course, your states like, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming,
Right.
those states, of course, those would all make abortion illegal. That's going to, that's going to push, I think that's going to cause like a ripple effect. So you're
Right.
going to have this huge section of the United States that would essentially be an abortion free zone,
Uh-huh.
which would be amazing. I
Mm,
mean, that
yeah.
would be amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and then you're just really fighting a battle in a few key states.
Mm.
And so then you're really sending the bulk of your resources into those, key
Okay.
states.
Right.
And I mean, yes, like you're still having to fight illegal abortion. Like, yes, yes, women are still having crisis pregnancies. Yes, you still have pregnancy centers. Yes, you've got to, still
Yeah.
work in the states where abortion is illegal. But as far as like a legislative battle goes, like
Yeah.
the bulk of those efforts are going to go now to those like really heavy blue states.
Right. Right.
And so now we've got a more targeted initiative instead of like
All
all
over.
across the country.
Right. Is there anything that gives you hope for the future with America on this front, and by and large, just liberty in general? What gives you hope for future generations that this will ultimately be preserved? And because I know sometimes the media can portray it very dark, but if I don't have hope, then why do I continue to do what I do? If we don't have hope, then why do we continue any of this?
Right.
What gives you hope?
Young people give me a lot of hope. Like my daughter is 13. Um, she is, I mean, she's sort of weird because she's like grown up in this, right? Like there's not a day we don't talk about abortion in my house, but like she and her friends, like they are like, it's so obvious to them,
Yeah.
like duh, like of course abortion's wrong, like
Right.
and I go to the March for Life every year,
Yeah.
and I mean 65% of the crowd, I mean they're like 25 and younger.
Yeah.
um I think we're living in time where medical technology, science, morality, reason, logic, everything falls now on the side of life. And
Mm.
these young people, like, they get it. I mean, like, my daughter, the first picture she has of herself is of herself in the womb. It's
Oh.
an ultrasound picture.
Right.
So, for me to say, like, oh, that wasn't you, or
Yeah. Yeah.
that was, you were just a nothing then.
Yeah.
Like, she's like, what? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Right. Like, of course that was me. Like, this was me. This is me. Right. Um, you know, those are the young people that we're dealing with now. And so it's harder to convince them that who they were in the womb isn't who they are right now.
Mm.
You know, we're dealing with like a different generation. They're more tech savvy. They have Google at their fingertips. They're more science savvy. Like, they're just different. You know, they're smarter than I was. You know, I was looking stuff up in encyclopedias, and now they're like, you know, on the computer,
Right.
on their phone. Knowledge is like just a click away for them. Um, and so it's just different. And they're smarter about this sort of information. They're learning about this earlier. Um, I'm not as easily influenced as even the millennial generation on these types of issues.
Yeah.
Um, that's just my opinion from being around my daughter's generation.
Right.
Um,
Agree.
so I have a lot of hope for them. Um, I have a lot of hope for the next 4 years if Donald Trump is elected.
Mm.
Um, I think that good things have happened over the last 4 years. I think more good things are going to happen as far as religious liberty um, goes. Um, he's not perfect, but he's better than any alternative we have.
Okay.
Um, and so I have a lot of hope there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I feel like people are starting to open their eyes. Like
Mm.
I I'm friends with the guy that started the walkaway campaign.
Uh-huh.
Um Brandon Straka from the walkaway campaign from the Democratic Party.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I'm seeing so many people like post every day, like young people who are like, I've always voted Democrat. I'm walking away from that party. I'm seeing how they're enslaving their people. They're lying to us all the time. It's not that they're necessarily becoming like, you know, conservative Republicans or whatever, but like
Yeah.
people are just waking up.
Mm.
You know, they're just realizing that this rhetoric that they've been sold for the past like however many years is just a lie.
Right.
And people are finally starting to think for themselves.
Mm.
And so I have a lot of hope in that
Mm.
as well. Like I'm just feeling really optimistic. I'm feeling I'm feeling optimistic. I'm feeling like even in the pro-life movement, I look at, the latest Marist poll that came out,
Mm.
there were a third of Democrats are identifying as pro-life because
Well.
the Democratic Party has swung their pendulum so far to the left, now
Yeah.
saying that abortion should be elective and on demand through all 9 months of pregnancy.
Right.
I feel like the Democratic platform has swung that pendulum so far to the left, they are now out of step with the majority of their constituency,
Right.
that even people who are Democrats are saying, whoa,
Right.
what is going on here? What are we doing here? That they are even identifying as pro-life. So
Yeah.
I mean, I just have a lot of hope for what's going on here. I have a lot of hope for the future. Um, I don't I don't hang my hat on everything political, but
Yeah.
I see things changing in our culture. Um, I see a lot of young people starting to speak out, and that people younger than me, like I'm almost 40. I'm like a friggin' antique now. Like I look around at the young people who are speaking out and I'm like, good for
Yeah.
you, like I feel like a boomer. But
Hey, boo.
it's good, like I love like all these like young, like fresh voices. They may not be right on everything, but they're like coming around, and they're
Yeah.
speaking out, and that's what's important.
Yeah.
Like their opinions are going to change and they're going to shape as they have new experiences and things like that. And they have kids and they get married and they start paying more and more taxes. And that's great, but like, I'm just glad that they're speaking out and they're using their voices. And that makes me so happy. And it gives me so much encouragement.
With Missouri set to possibly be the first state to make abortion illegal, are there any places in Missouri, because the Libertarian Republic is a Missouri-based magazine, so we're national, but it's based out of Missouri. But are there any places in Missouri that you think are leading the fight within the state that people could support if they live in that area?
So the St. Louis Coalition for Life has been really on the ground leading that fight to close down that last Planned Parenthood clinic in St. Louis.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, I have been outside of that Planned Parenthood in St. Louis many, many times. There is people will say, well, there's a darkness outside of every abortion clinic. Okay, fair. But
Right.
there is something I can't even really explain it. There is a darkness outside of that clinic that I have only felt a few times outside of any other clinic. It is I can't really explain. The only way that I can explain it, and this sounds so like cliche, and I'm not even trying to make it sound cliche, but it feels like what I can imagine it would feel like standing outside of like a concentration camp.
Mm.
There is like this heaviness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like it's different than any other abortion clinic. It's not like I don't know. There's just something so dark happening there, and I don't know what it is. I don't know what makes it different, but it is just heavy.
Right.
And when that clinic closes for good, and I believe that it will,
right,
there will be some sort of like it will be an unbelievable victory in heaven.
oh,
I
yeah.
believe that. Now I know that there's a clinic just 10 miles away in Illinois, but there is something very symbolic about having a state in the United States that is free of abortion.
Right.
I do believe that it will set a precedent for the rest of the United States, because there are 6 other states in the United States that have only one operating abortion facility.
Right.
And Mississippi is one of those states. And that state is actually operating without a license. It is operating illegally. It is only being allowed to operate because a judge is allowing it to operate. And if that clinic in Missouri would finally close, then that clinic in Mississippi would have no leg to stand on. It would set a precedent that would finally allow that judge to shut down that clinic in Mississippi. I believe it would create a ripple effect throughout the United States that would then allow those other 6 states that have clinics open, some of them by judge's orders only, to finally close those clinics.
Right. And if those 6
so it's a big deal. Like, we need to shut down that clinic in Missouri.
Right.
And I think the St. Louis Coalition for Life is doing a fantastic job on the ground there every single day, counseling those women. They are doing the very best job of draining that clinic of their financial assets, because they're taking women out of the clinic and getting them into life-affirming pregnancy centers. So they are doing the very best at affecting their bottom line.
Right. All about the money.
That's right.
If you hit them where it hurts, hit them in the pocketbook.
Exactly right.
Yeah. With everything that the current administration has done, I know, talking about the Trump administration, a big promise was that Planned Parenthood would be defunded. Now, you have several places of progress in that, but the Trump administration still has not completely defunded Planned Parenthood. Do you personally see that is an issue with supporting him? Do you think that would be something that more progress will be made in the future? Should he get elected again, or how do you think he's doing on that front?
That's something I'm not really understanding. When he took them out of the Title 10 funding program, which was that was that was a good step in the right direction, right? Um, there's other title cash grant pots of money. And it's all very complicated because all of these title programs they're run differently, they're operated differently. Some of them are cash grants where there's a finite amount of money that's given. Title 19, which is Medicaid money, that's an unlimited amount of money that these Planned Parenthood centers get. That funding is completely different than Title 10 funding. It's not as easy to get them out of that program. Of course, that's the largest pot of money where Planned Parenthood is being funded. That is entirely more difficult to get them out of the Title 19 program. So I'm not mad at him that he hasn't gotten them out of that yet, because I know that is a very difficult program to defund them from. I know that it's going to take a very strategic plan. I also know that it's going to be an incredible court battle when that does happen. It's going to be an incredible court challenge to take them out of the Title 19 program. What I do know, though, is that because he took them out of the Title 10 program,
Right.
there are other cash grant pots of money like Title 5 and Title 20.
Okay.
Those are finite amounts of money that Planned Parenthood is getting money from. Okay. And what I was wanting to see is if his removal of Planned Parenthood from the Title 10 program was going to stand up in court, and it did. So what I was hoping was that, okay, great. Now this set a precedent, so he can actually remove them from Title 20 and Title 5.
Right.
And I was waiting for him to do that. He has not done that yet. So I work closely with a few groups, national groups, that work directly with him. I don't have a line to President Trump. I have actually been told by people that work with him that he doesn't work with me because I'm too controversial, which is really funny to me, that Donald Trump doesn't work with me because I'm too controversial. Whatever. Do what?
If it were me, I would say thank you for the compliment.
I mean, whatever. It's fine. I'm like, I don't know if I should be personally offended or, flattered. I don't know. But
But of all people to say that you are controversial, that's
I know, right?
Right.
I was like, I'm gonna let that sink in for a minute. I think I'm gonna be flattered. So,
yeah.
But yeah, so. But I do work closely with other conservative groups that do work with him, that do have a direct line to him. So my hope is that I'll be able to have, because I think one of the problems, honestly, is that I'm not even sure that they even know all of the lines of funding that Planned Parenthood is involved in. Because Planned Parenthood, they have their hands in so many pots of money. And unless you're looking for it, I'm not even sure that President Trump would know. I mean, there are so many different and people may think, well, of course he knows. But I'm telling you, there are so many pots of money that are out there that that nonprofits can get their hands into.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you're looking at it, unless you're looking for it, um, they may not even know. And
Mm-hmm.
so my goal is to somehow get this information into his hands and say, look, you've already set the precedent that this will hold up in court, that
Right.
you can take these, and so what my goal is to get into his hands. This is the amount of money that they're receiving from X, Y, Z, from these
Right.
different funding sources. Now that the precedent has been set, you need to go after these pots of money and remove them from here. I don't know if it'll make any difference, but to me, he said he was going to do these things. He's only taken them out of one group of funds,
Right.
and I think we all expect him to do more.
Right.
This is an opportunity for how he can do it.
To deliver on that promise to the
That's
constituents,
right.
because
That's right.
he does use the bully pulpit to speak, and that's great. But personally, I'd like to see more action and less talk.
I agree. And
I
he's
mean,
done a lot of things, and a lot of things that the media, of course, doesn't even report on. I mean, there was something that went pretty quietly under the radar. He reinstated um, the ability for adoption agencies to be able to discriminate, and I mean, honestly, to discriminate against homosexual couples. So there were many adoption agencies that had to close because under Obama had put out a ruling that said that Christian adoption agencies could not make rules saying that they would not um, that adoption agencies, if a homosexual couple came to them and said, we want to adopt, that Christian adoption agency had to allow a homosexual couple to adopt.
mm,
That even a private agency could not set up rules to disqualify people. And so many Christian adoption agencies said, well, then we're going to close
right.
because based on our beliefs, we do not believe homosexuals should be allowed to adopt children. So
Right.
all of these adoption agencies closed. Well, President Trump reversed that rule,
Yeah.
allowing private adoption agencies to set up whatever rules they want.
Yeah.
And that happened, and it was like hush, hush from the media. Nobody reported on it. And so there's been many things that he's done that have been really great for religious liberty,
Yeah.
for the Christian community. But of course, when those things happen, like nobody even hears about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you, I mean, obviously as a Christian, that conflicts with my religious beliefs as far as gay marriage and all those things. But when it comes to a state issue, government shouldn't be involved in that at all. And it's from my perspective as Christians, we realize that God is the one who sets what marriage is. And so I'd like to see it, just be a strictly religious issue and remove the state from it all the way around and get the government completely out of marriage. Because I've always felt that it was, strictly a religious issue, which God defined in Genesis. But I do feel that yes, while the private businesses should be able to discriminate if it's against their religious beliefs, and I support that 100%, I would still much rather see a homosexual couple adopt a child than see the child be aborted. How do you feel about that?
Oh, well, I mean, certainly we don't, yes, we don't want a child to be aborted, but here's the issue. The issue is not that there aren't enough people to step up to adopt. There are over 200,000 couples, same-sex couple, I mean, heterosexual couples waiting
Right.
to adopt a child. So I would say, okay, that would be a valid argument if we didn't have heterosexual couples waiting to adopt.
Yeah.
The problem is that we don't have enough children because they're being aborted. So we've got over 200,000 couples, heterosexual married couples waiting to adopt children. We don't have any babies. Right. In fact, there are there are Christian adoption agencies closing down all across the country. There was one that just closed recently in Austin because they had all of these couples waiting to adopt. They had no babies
Yeah.
because women are aborting their babies instead of choosing adoption.
Right. Yeah, that's really sad, because like I said, I don't, from a personal standpoint, I don't agree with the homosexual thing, but at the same time, I don't. The same government that could tell them what they can or can't do or how they can live could tell me how I can as a Christian, and so it's a very scary road to try to go down.
Well, another problem is that a lot of couples who want to adopt, they only want to adopt infants.
Yeah,
And in the meantime, there's a lot of children languishing in the foster care system who also need forever homes. But adoptive couples generally only want babies.
yeah,
And they don't even consider adopting maybe an older child because they don't want to deal with the issues of an older child. But these older children, they also need forever families. They also need homes. And I always tell people, they come to me and they say, God has really put it on our heart to adopt a child. And I say, did he put it on your heart to adopt a child, or did he put it on your heart to adopt an infant? And they'll say, well, he put it on my heart to adopt a child. And I'm like, okay, then go adopt a child.
right.
Right.
That
um,
makes sense.
and that may mean that you're opening your heart up to a child who's 11, 12, 13, 16 years old,
Yeah.
right? It may not mean opening your heart up to an infant,
Mm.
right? Um, and it's not for everybody. I mean, you do have to have a special skill set.
Yeah.
God does have to prepare you for that, but I do believe that if God has called you to that, then he will equip you for it.
Absolutely. I don't think that from the faith perspective, God doesn't equip the people. And you might not be, when God tells you you're going to do something, you might not be ready for it at the time, but when you are, um, when you're supposed to do it, He'll give you the tools to do it.
That's right.
He doesn't leave somebody stranded. You
That's
know?
right.
So He always equips the people He calls. And I mean,
That's
you
right.
look at all the people He's used throughout history, and kind of like what we talked about before. A lot of those people were very flawed individuals.
Yes.
But look at what they did. I mean, Moses had a stuttering problem, for God's sake. And what did he do? He said, "Don't worry about it. This is what I told you to do." And no, I'm afraid I can't speak. I said, "Fine, shut up. I'll give you Aaron." That's the Caleb translation, but that's kind of how I
Yeah.
on down. It's like, if God tells you you can do something, and if God, the God of the universe, who created you, who knows you better than anybody ever could, and He sees what you're capable of, if He says that you can do it, then have the faith.
Mhm.
Have the faith. And I heard it said one time from a pastor that Jesus came to the earth to show people exactly what a human being could do who lives 100% in communion with God. And so I think he sets the precedent. You
Yeah.
know, he sets the precedent, and so it's definitely a thing that just have the faith and don't be so concerned about. Well, I'm not good enough. Well, guess what? None of us are good
No.
enough. I mean, if I was waiting to be good enough, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now. um, but with all the things that are going on, and for people who want to try to get involved and try to help, what are some areas that you think they can get involved to help other people in this avenue?
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that there are generally, of course, you can always get creative, but I tell people that there's sort of three general areas to get involved in the pro-life movement. So, um, there's, your legislative areas. So, that's going to be your traditional sort of right to life movements, the national organizations, your state organizations. So, they're going to have different things going on depending on the time of year. Um, when you're in session, when you're not in session, that may be something that you're interested in. They're going to have different activities going on throughout the year that they may need your participation in, whether it's calling your state legislators, calling your congressmen, things like that. So that may be something that you're interested in doing. But generally, that's something that you can do all the time. It doesn't take up a lot of time. It doesn't take a lot of work. That's something that we should all be involved in all the time.
Right.
That's one thing that, every pro-lifer, every conservative, every Christian, we should all be involved in that because it doesn't take up a lot of your time. And that's really our responsibility as voters and as responsible people. We should all
Right.
be involved
Right.
in the legislative process. So that's one thing. In addition to that, there's sort of two different areas that we can get involved in. There's um, pregnancy center work. And so that's going to be groups. Most communities have a pregnancy resource center in their area. These are groups that provide counsel and resource assistance to women who are in crisis pregnancies, who maybe need support during their pregnancy and even after their pregnancy. So after they've had their babies, they provide classes, they provide Bible studies, they just befriend and really walk on this journey of motherhood and parenthood with women and men who have their babies. They do a lot of options counseling for women who maybe are considering abortion. They are really being, the hands and feet of Christ to those who are in the valley of decision. Or maybe who do make a decision for life, but just need some extra resources and extra care. They always need volunteers, people that can help them. And of course, they operate solely on donations and volunteerism. So unlike Planned Parenthood, they do not receive more than $500 million of your tax dollars every year. So they rely on donations and people like you to help support them. And then there's more of like a boots on the ground activism piece. And that is going to be sort of like your 40 days for life, going out in front of the abortion facilities where abortions are taking place. So a lot of times for a lot of us, for a lot of pro-lifers, our pro-life efforts stop at legislation and we say, well, we're pro-life and we make calls to our senators and that's how we're going to be pro-life. But let me tell you something. Abortions aren't happening in the White House and they're not happening in the halls of Congress. They're happening in our communities, down the roads from us, in places to in our communities, to women who are sitting in churches with us, in the pews with us, in our communities, people that we know, people that we love, people that are all around us in the grocery stores with us. And these are women who are having abortions, not because they're terrible women, not because they're evil, but because they feel like they have no other option. And if we are not out there on the sidewalk to give them love, to be the light of Christ for them, to show them that there are people that care, that there are other options, to refer them to those pregnancy centers, to show them hope. When they walk into the doors of that abortion facility, there are no other options for them. They're not going to hear about the pregnancy center inside of that abortion clinic. They are not going to hear about adoption. They're not going to hear about any other options. They're going to be coerced and manipulated onto that abortion clinic table, and the life of their child is going to be taken away from them. And so we have to be that last line of defense for that mother and that child by standing and praying and being a witness to her in front of that abortion facility. And so those are sort of the two primary ways outside of legislation that we can work in our own communities to reach out to women who are in crisis.
That's good. Good stuff. Well, that'll about wrap it up. One last thing: the people that want to get in touch with you, where can they reach out to you, whether social media or whatever? Where can they get in touch with Abby?
Well, I'm all over social media on Instagram, pro-life Abby Johnson. I'm on Twitter at Abby Johnson. I'm on Facebook, Abby Johnson. let's see, I think those are all the social media I have. And then my website is just abbyj.com.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for your time.
Of course. Thanks, Caleb.